Okay guys, welcome to part B of this storm chasing image that I took just a few days ago here in Melbourne. I didn't get the chance in the last recording, part A, to show you how to stitch the images and how I went about processing that here in Lightroom as well as Photoshop. So here we go. So in part A, as you saw, this was the image that we worked up. This was just a single frame that I captured, but I also went ahead and did a pano. So I've shot various frames from left to right in order to capture this particular image. In fact, right to left, because that's the way the waves were going. So when you're stitching a pano or coming to shoot a pano in the first place, set the camera to manual, okay? Have it on manual exposure so that the exposure stays the same throughout the series of frames. Keep the focal length on the same the whole time. So this was at, as we can see here, let's have a look here, 145 mil at f4 thousandths of a second. It was blowing pretty hard. So f4 is not ideal, probably like a little bit more in terms of the aperture there, but I was hand holding this, and as I said, it was blowing a gale. This storm front through about 100-kilometre-hour winds eventually once it hit, so it was quite blowy. So exposure the same, keep the focal length the same, okay? Keep the camera roughly in the same line here. As you can see, I've sort of kept the horizon pretty much the same, although it tends to sort of get less here, okay? So what I've come to do then is put together this image and stitch it all together, okay? And so what we do here is in Lightroom, I've got this image. Now people often say to me, how do you know where your pano starts and where it finishes? Well, I'm quite lazy. I just tend to sort of be able to look and go, hey, I remember shooting from there to there. Other people take photographs of their hands or fingers, etc. At the start of the pano and at the end of the pano to show where it starts and ends. But I just remember from this frame through to this particular frame here is where I captured this particular pano. So how do I select all those pictures in Lightroom? I just click on the first image here, okay? The first image of the pano, and I keep my finger on the shift key and I click on the last image of the pano, which is this one here, number 20, here on the far right. And that will select all the images in between, okay? So I've actually got 17 images here that I'm gonna stitch together. Now, if I just right click anywhere here inside one of the images here, I select Edit In. Now, if you don't know how to right click on a Mac, by the way, it's the control button on the keyboard, because these mice don't have right buttons. So right click, Edit In, and you'll see here you get an option that says Merged Panorama in Photoshop. Okay, so we click on that. Now, this is, of course, if you have Photoshop on your computer. Many people probably don't these days because Lightroom does so much. Okay, if you don't have Photoshop, I recommend getting another third-party software that can cost less than $100 in most cases, that will be able to stitch your pano together without having to buy Photoshop. I rarely use Photoshop these days, although I'm quite proficient in it. Lightroom does so much for me now and is so quick and easy and intuitive that I don't need to use Photoshop. So this now comes up with just an error message to say this version of Lightroom requires the latest Camera Raw plugin, but I just say, look, open it anyway. Okay, and so what that's going to do is within Photoshop, which I'm now in here, it's come up with the photo merge pop-up window, which is basically auto-populating all of those images that I've selected in Lightroom to be able to stitch them together. Blend images together, yes, we want to do that. Let's remove any vignette removal. So what that is naturally within a camera, especially at the faster apertures like 2.8, f4, etc., you will have some darkening of the edges just through the light coming through certain elements of the lens, and that can quite often create a line or a darkening of the image where we stitch the images together. So let's get rid of that and let's remove any distortion, etc. So when we click OK on this, it will then come to then stitch the pano together. Now that's going to take a fair bit of time. I'm shooting on a Nikon D800E, large files, and so if I try and stitch it all together now, we're going to be waiting a good 5-10 minutes. So I'll leave that for the minute and I'll show you one that I prepared earlier. Here we go. It's now stitched the image together. It's created all of these layers. As you can see here, what it's done is it's taken each of these particular parts of the image and it's stitched it together with a line of best fit through here. So it's not a straight line, it's the line of best fit to create this beautiful seamless pano. Okay, so there's my pano stitched together. As you can see, given that I've shot right to left, and that's the way the waves were going, and I've done it fairly quickly as I've scanned right to left. The waves look pretty seamless. They look like they haven't even moved as such. So done a pretty good job there. What I then do is go to layer, flatten image. So I want to flatten this image, okay? I don't need these layers now. Unless there's a massive issue with the aligning of these layers, I don't need to do anything more with this. So I flatten the image. But the one problem I do have, I can see here, is I've got this big bow in the photograph, essentially from not rotating around the nodal point of the lens and working the image right to left, and just a little bit of distortion there. How do I go about fixing that? Okay, bring up the rulers on your screen, and that's just a simple case of pressing Command R, okay, or View Rulers, okay, Command R there, okay. Now, when I do that, I can draw a guide down into the image here, and as you can see, when I draw a guide down into the image and lay it across that horizon, we have got a really big bow there, okay? So how do you draw a guide? You simply just click inside of the rulers here at the top and just drag it down, okay? And to get rid of it, you can just drag it up and release, okay? Now what we want to do is we want to select all of this image, get our marching ants around the whole of this image, as we can see here, okay? We've selected all of that image, Command A on the keyboard for a shortcut, and then we go to Edit, Transform, Warp. Edit, Transform, Warp, okay? And what that allows us to do is it allows us to just individually or carefully drag parts of this image, which I'm going to do here as I'm talking, in order to flatten out this horizon, okay? So I'm going to drag that down there from the bottom right. I'm going to drag this down from the bottom left. And it's pretty much, just by doing that, got our horizon straight. Now I can move this guide, I would hope. No, I can't, because I'm still in transform. Let's just draw a new one. And as you can see there, I've dragged that guide down and I've zoomed in just by pressing Command plus or minus on the keyboard, okay? And then to move left to right, I've just used my hand tool, which, as a shortcut, is the space bar. And I can just drag this horizon down a little more to be on the guide there. Okay, let's move across, finger on the space bar. Let's drag this up a bit just to get that right. Command 0 takes us back to full screen. If I want to get rid of those guides just to see how good it looks, just click on View, Clear Guides. No, I haven't executed the warp. So let's just execute the warp just by pressing Return on the keyboard, and that will make those corrections. Here we go, it's transforming the image. And then once it's done this, what I want to do is I just want to clear those guides, and you'll be able to see how nice and straight that particular horizon is. Once I've got that straight horizon, I can pretty much start working on this image. What I'll do is I'll save the image, and then what that will do is suck it back into Lightroom here. Okay, and here in Lightroom, if we can get rid of this progress pop up here, my computer's running a bit slow this morning. So once this all loads up, it's actually quite a large image. I think it ended up being 1.75 gigabyte. It's only one row. It's not a double row or triple row, but it's only one row of images that I've stitched together there. And hence, when I'm trying to work with it in Lightroom, it's just taking a while to load because it's having to process so many pixels. So this is Lightroom just taking its time to process this image. Now this is, in fact, my final image. I will go back in the history here to show you what I've done in order to produce what I've got here. But essentially, a lot like what I did in the Part A video of this storm front, was that I was drawing some gradients and increasing the contrast and increasing the saturation in the water in particular. So if I go back here, go to the develop module, go into my history, be able to have a look at this and see that if I just go back here to the start, no, it's not letting me because it's still trying to process the image. So if it does this in the next few seconds, I'll show you where it ended up, or started with and ended up. You can see that easily through Photoshop here. Get rid of the guides, clear guides, view clear guides. There's the image, okay? But what I've essentially done in Lightroom is I've taken this section of the image, so to speak, and then worked it to create this. Go back to the start. I'll show you what the image originally looked like. It's taking its time. Help. Here we go. Let's have a look. Cropping it, cropping it, cropping it, cropping it. Didn't look like that. It's showing me the final image. It's taking its time to catch up. But anyway, you can see, we started off with something similar to that. Let's just crop this anyway. Crop this in Photoshop, which I don't normally do, but just for the purpose of showing you how it started in Lightroom and how it ended up. This is how I started with it in Lightroom. This is, again, how I started in Lightroom. Thank you for catching up, Lightroom. And so that was pretty bland and boring, but then it was pretty easy then to just transform this image and create something special just by drawing a couple of gradients over the sky, drawing a gradient up from the bottom to work the water, increasing the exposure, contrast, etc. As you can see, the adjustments that I've made here, increase the exposure by half a stop, the contrast almost to 100, dropping the blacks down to give it a real mood, increasing the clarity to create some localized contrast, and increasing the saturation overall. And that's the final image. If you're after some more details on exactly how to do that, watch part A of this video series and you'll be able to see exactly how I did that. Thanks for listening.